Millionaire CEO sees the signature on the painting the girl begged him to buy and breaks down in tears. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The October wind whipped through Manhattan's Steel Canyon, sending golden leaves spiraling past James Morgan's office window. From his penthouse suite atop the Morgan Tower, the 42-year-old billionaire barely noticed the spectacular autumn display. His attention was fixed on the latest acquisition for his world-renowned art collection, an early Elizabeth Bennet canvas that had cost him $8 million. "Another EB for the vault, sir," his assistant Catherine remarked, placing the authenticity papers on his desk. James nodded without enthusiasm. 17 down, 1 to go. The famed Redemption series remained incomplete, the final 18th painting continuing to elude him despite 15 years of searching. He turned, back to the window, his reflection staring back at him. Perfectly tailored suit, perfectly empty life. The art collection that had become his obsession filled the walls of his homes but couldn't fill the hollowness inside him. Something caught his eye, a small flash of yellow on the sidewalk below. Squinting through the glass, he spotted a makeshift lemonade stand and a small figure with copper-colored hair, oddly out of place among the suits rushing past. "Catherine, is that a child selling lemonade outside our building?" "In October?" Catherine joined him at the window. "Yes, she's been there all week. Security says she's harmless, just a girl trying to make a few dollars." "In the financial district? Hardly the place for a lemonade stand." As if sensing his gaze, the girl looked up. Even from 40 floors above, James felt the intensity of her determination. She held up a small sign he couldn't read, but her gesture was unmistakably directed at his window. "She's been asking if she could speak with you," Catherine added. "Security keeps turning her away." "Me? Why would she want to see me?" "Apparently she has something to sell you, not lemonade." James frowned. "How old is she?" "About 12, they think." Something about the girl's persistence nagged at him. "Tell security to let her up tomorrow. 10 minutes, that's all." Catherine raised an eyebrow but nodded. 10 minutes with James Morgan, you'll make her day. Little did he know that this encounter would completely transform his life. Hannah Wilson's hands trembled as the elevator climbed to the top floor of Morgan Tower. The security guard beside her stood silently, his earlier skepticism replaced with curiosity after his boss's unexpected summons. "Remember, kid, 10 minutes, he said as the doors opened to reveal a sleek reception area. Hannah clutched her canvas tighter, wrapped carefully in her mother's old scarf. "That's all I need." Catherine greeted her with professional politeness, eyeing the wrapped package. "Mr. Morgan will see you now." Inside the sprawling office, James Morgan stood by the window, his back to the door. The walls displayed spectacular artwork, and Hannah immediately recognized 3 of her mother's earlier pieces. "Mr. Morgan," Hannah began, her voice steadier than she felt. "Thank you for seeing me." He turned, his expression unreadable. "You're quite persistent. Most adults don't try as hard to reach me. Mom said sometimes you need to stand your ground until the right people listen." She stepped forward. "I'm Hannah Wilson." "And what brings you to sell lemonade outside a financial tower in autumn, Hannah Wilson?" "The lemonade was just to be noticed," she admitted. "This is what I came to show you." She carefully unwrapped the canvas. James approached with professional disinterest that vanished the moment the painting was revealed. A stunning abstract scene in blues and golds, unmistakably Elizabeth Bennet's style. His breath caught as his eyes found the signature in the corner. "Where did you get this?" His voice had lost its businesslike tone. "My mother painted it, before she died 2 months ago." Hannah watched his reaction carefully. "Elizabeth Bennet Wilson was my mom." James sank into his chair, eyes fixed on the painting. "Elizabeth Bennet. Had children?" "3 of us. I'm the oldest. Olivia's 9, Max is 6. Her voice wavered slightly. "We're going to lose our house next week unless I can sell this painting. Mom said it would be valuable to the right collector." James stared at the canvas, then at Hannah's face, seeing the resemblance now. Those same determined eyes that had once stared into his after pulling him from a wrecked car. "This is the final piece of the redemption series," he whispered. Hannah nodded. Mom called it Guardian Angel. She said it would complete a story. James's fingers hovered over the brushstrokes, not quite touching. "Do you know what this is worth?" "Enough to save our home, I hope." "Much more than that." He looked up, his eyes unexpectedly damp. "Where are your siblings now?" "Home with Mrs. Abernathy next door, but she can't watch them much longer. Her daughters, moving her to a retirement home." James pressed a button on his desk. "Catherine, clear my afternoon, and have the car brought around." He turned to Hannah. "I'd like to see where Elizabeth lived, and meet her other children." The painting that had eluded him for years had finally appeared, along with a connection to the woman who had once saved his life, and then vanished. James's Bentley looked absurdly out of place on Maple Street, a modest neighborhood in Queens, where tidy but aging homes lined the cracked sidewalks. Hannah fidgeted in the leather seat, uncertain what to make of the billionaire's sudden interest. "It's the blue one." She pointed to a 2-story Victorian house that had once been charming, but now showed clear signs of neglect. Peeling paint, a sagging porch, and an overgrown garden revealed the struggles of its recent past. "Mom got too sick to keep up with things," Hannah explained, watching James's expression. "And then the medical bills." James nodded, studying the structure with unexpected emotion. "She lived here all this time." Inside, the contrast between neglect and care was striking. Though shabby, the home was meticulously clean. Faded furniture was arranged with purpose, and the walls, James noted immediately, were adorned with dozens of Elizabeth's sketches and smaller paintings, none valuable enough for galleries but exquisite in their intimacy. "Hannah, you're back early." A small girl with dark braids came running from the kitchen, stopping abruptly at the sight of the stranger. Behind her, a tow-headed boy peeked shyly. "This is Mr. Morgan," Hannah explained. "He's interested in Mom's painting." An elderly woman appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dishcloth. "Thank heavens you're here. I need to leave for my doctor's appointment." She eyed James suspiciously. "Who's this?" After brief introductions and Mrs. Abernathy's departure, James found himself seated at a worn kitchen table while Hannah made tea. Olivia watched him with undisguised curiosity, while Max remained half-hidden behind a doorframe. "Your mom was very talented," James said, trying to bridge the awkward silence. "She painted every day, even when she was sick," Olivia volunteered. "She said her hands needed to keep telling stories." Hannah placed a chipped mug before him. "The bank says we have to be out by Tuesday. That's why I've been trying to sell the painting." James sipped the too-sweet tea. "May I see the foreclosure notice?" Hannah produced a stack of official letters, watching as James reviewed them with growing concern. The situation was worse than he'd imagined. Not just a mortgage in default, but medical debt that had completely overwhelmed Elizabeth's modest estate. "How have you been managing?" he asked, noting the nearly empty refrigerator visible through the open door. "I babysit after school, and Olivia sells her friendship bracelets at the park." Hannah's matter-of-fact tone broke his heart. "Mom's health insurance ran out when she couldn't work anymore." James pulled out his phone, stepping away to make a call. When he returned, his decision was made. "Hannah, I'm going to buy your mother's painting. It's the final piece I've been searching for to complete an important collection." He wrote a check with more zeros than Hannah had ever seen. "This should cover the mortgage and leave enough for expenses until we figure out a more permanent solution." "We?" Hannah asked cautiously. "Your mother saved my life once," James said, glancing at the children's confused faces. "I owe her a debt I never repaid. Let me help now." As he prepared to leave, James paused before a small sketch near the door, a rough drawing of a car crash and a woman pulling a young man to safety. In the corner, Elizabeth had written, "The day everything changed." He touched it gently. "I'll be back tomorrow. We have much to discuss." True to his word, James returned the next day, his Bentley now less conspicuous among the delivery trucks unloading groceries, household supplies, and furniture at the Wilson home. He watched from the sidewalk as workers carried in new mattresses and a refrigerator. "You didn't have to do all this," Hannah said, appearing beside him with a clipboard. She'd taken charge of directing the deliveries with surprising efficiency. "Actually, I did," James replied. The house inspection revealed several safety issues. The electrical system was dangerously outdated. Inside, the transformation was already visible. The pantry stood fully stocked. New linens brightened the EU bedrooms, and a team of workers evaluated the roof damage and failing furnace. Through it all, Olivia followed James like a shadow, her initial wariness replaced by fascination. "Do you really own a whole building?" she asked, trailing him to the dining room where he'd set up a temporary workspace. "Several, actually." James smiled at her wide-eyed reaction. "Hannah says you collect Mom's paintings. Were you friends?" James hesitated. "We met once, very briefly. She helped me when I needed it most." "That sounds like Mom," Olivia said. "She always helped people." Max, still shy but growing bolder, appeared with a drawing. "I made this for you," he whispered, placing a crayon sketch of what James assumed was himself, a tall figure in a suit surrounded by colorful shapes. "Those are the paintings you collect," Max explained, pointing at the shapes. "Hannah told us." "It's excellent," James replied, genuinely touched. "You have your mother's talent." Later, after the workers had gone and the children were occupied, with dinner, James examined Elizabeth's painting more thoroughly in the afternoon light streaming through the newly cleaned windows. The canvas depicted an abstract guardian angel watching over 3 small figures, with subtle elements that clearly connected it to the other 17 works in the Redemption series. But there was something else. Barely perceptible marks in the background that seemed intentional rather than decorative. Numbers, perhaps, or a coded message. She worked on that one for months, Hannah said, finding him lost in contemplation. Even when she could barely hold a brush. "It's masterful," James replied. "The final piece of a puzzle I've been assembling for 15 years. Hannah sat across from him, suddenly looking much older than 12. "You said my mother saved your life." "How?" James set the painting carefully aside. "It was 20 years ago. I just made my first million and was driving too fast on a rainy night, showing off my new sports car. I took a curve too quickly and crashed into a tree. The car caught fire." He rolled up his sleeve, revealing a burn scar. "I was trapped, losing consciousness. Then someone was pulling me out, dragging me to safety. It was Elizabeth. She was coming home from an art class, saw the crash and stopped. By the time the ambulance arrived, she was gone. But I saw her name on the police report, started following her career. When her paintings began appearing in galleries, I bought them, one by one. The Redemption series especially. They spoke to me. But I never managed to find her personally to thank her." Hannah's eyes glistened. "She never told us that story. I became obsessed with completing her collections, especially after she stopped exhibiting new work. I never knew why she disappeared from the art world." "Cancer," Hannah said simply. "The first diagnosis came 5 years ago. She kept painting but stopped dealing with galleries. Said she didn't have energy for the business side anymore." James nodded slowly, pieces falling into place. "The last painting that appeared for sale was 3 years ago. That's when things got really bad. She needed expensive treatments, sold whatever paintings she still had directly to private buyers." James felt a wave of guilt. All those years, searching for her work, never knowing the artist herself was struggling, dying. "There's something else you should see," Hannah said, rising. She returned with a worn leather journal. "Mom's diary, she wrote about you." James accepted it with surprise. "About me?" "Not by name. She called you her angel investor. Someone who kept buying her work through different galleries, keeping her going." Hannah opened to a marked page. She knew it was the same person. She wrote that whoever collected the Redemption series understood something about her that no one else did. James read the passage, recognizing with astonishment that Elizabeth had been aware of him all along. His Anonymous purchases through various galleries and auction houses forming a lifeline she had recognized. "The 18th painting," he murmured. "She knew I was looking for it." Hannah nodded. "She finished it just before she died, said it would find its way to complete the circle." As Max and Olivia's laughter echoed from the kitchen, James realized that Elizabeth had entrusted him with far more than just the final piece of an art collection. The autumn days fell into an unexpected rhythm. James found himself spending more time at the Wilson home than at his penthouse. He'd set up a small office in the newly refurbished sunroom, taking video calls while watching Max construct elaborate block structures in the garden. The house itself was transforming. Contractors replaced the roof and aging plumbing. The electrical system was completely rewired and a security system installed. The painting that had brought him there remained carefully stored in a climate-controlled art carrier, waiting for proper authentication, though James needed no experts to confirm what his heart already knew. On this particular afternoon, James waited outside Westbrook Elementary School, feeling oddly nervous as parents glanced curiously at the billionaire sitting in his luxury car among their sedans and minivans. When the bell rang, Max burst through the doors, his face lighting up at the sight of James. "You came." He sprinted over, backpack bouncing. "I promised, didn't I?" James helped him with the seatbelt. "How was school?" "Ms. Peterson says I'm good at math," Max reported proudly. "And I told her about the painting that saved our house." James smiled at the child's simplification of their complex situation. In Max's world, everything had been solved by a painting and the mysterious rich man who had appeared in their lives. But the reality wasn't so simple. James's phone buzzed with a message from his attorney. "Painting authenticated. Conservative valuation. $12.4 Need to discuss children's situation urgently." At the house, Hannah was already home, helping Olivia with homework at the dining table. The normalcy of the scene struck James powerfully. How quickly he'd grown accustomed to these three children in his life. How empty his existence had seemed before them. "I made chicken casserole," Hannah announced, her culinary skills improving under Mrs. Abernathy's continued guidance. "There's plenty if you want to stay for dinner." "I'd like that," James replied, setting down his briefcase. "But first, can we talk after the children eat?" Hannah nodded, immediately alert to his serious tone. Later, after Olivia and Max were engrossed in a movie, James and Hannah sat in the kitchen. He placed a folder on the table between them. "The authentication is complete," he began. "Your mother's painting is indeed the final piece of the redemption series. Its value is not significant." Hannah's eyes widened at the figure on the appraisal form. "That's life-changing," James finished. "Which brings us to an important discussion. The money I gave you initially was just to stop the foreclosure. This," he tapped the appraisal, "represents your mother's estate, which legally belongs to all three of you. I've set up a trust fund that will secure your future education and needs. But there's a more immediate concern." He took a deep breath. "Hannah, who has legal guardianship of you and your siblings," the girl's expression fell. "No one, officially. Mom didn't have any family except us. Mrs. Abernathy has been helping, but she's moving soon. That's what my attorney discovered. Without a designated guardian, Child Protective Services will eventually become involved. You could be placed in foster care, possibly separated." Hannah's composure cracked for the first time since he'd met her. "They can't separate us. We're all we have left of Mom." James reached across the table, gently covering her trembling hand with his. "There's another option. It's unconventional, but—" He paused, surprised by how much the answer mattered to him. "I could apply for guardianship. All three of you would stay together here in your home." Hannah stared at him. "You? But why would you want that responsibility? You barely know us." James considered his answer carefully. "Your mother changed the course of my life 20 years ago. Her art has been my only real connection to something meaningful, and now meeting you three." He gestured around the kitchen, where children's artwork hung alongside grocery lists. "This feels more like home than anywhere I've lived in decades. But you're James Morgan. You run a financial empire. An empire that means nothing without people to care about. The truth of his words struck him as he spoke them. I have resources, security, and connections that can give you opportunities. But you three have given me something I didn't know I was missing. Hannah studied him with those penetrating eyes, so like her mother's. What happens to Mom's painting? It belongs to your family, James said. The trust will manage it along with your mother's other works. Museums will want to exhibit the complete series, which would increase its value further. He hesitated. I would never separate you from your mother's legacy. Hannah was quiet for a long moment. I need to think about it, and talk to Olivia, and Max. Of course, there's no rush to... A sharp knock interrupted them. James opened the door to find a woman in a crisp suit holding an official-looking folder. I'm Claire Donovan from Child Protective Services, she announced, peering past him into the house. We've received a report about 3 minors living without proper guardianship. Hannah appeared behind James, her face tight with fear. Who reported us? The woman consulted her papers. A Sarah Bennett filed the concern. James felt Hannah stiffen beside him. Sarah Bennett? She whispered. Mom's sister, Hannah explained, her voice hollow. The one who hasn't spoken to us in years. The caseworker looked between them. And you are, sir? James Morgan, he replied, straightening to his full height. Family friend and financial trustee for the Wilson children. Well, Mr. Morgan, I need to conduct an evaluation of the children's living situation, particularly since it appears their aunt is now expressing interest in their welfare. As Claire Donovan stepped inside, James exchanged a worried glance with Hannah. The security they had begun building suddenly felt fragile. Claire Donovan spent 2 hours inspecting the Wilson home, making notes on her tablet and interviewing each child separately. James paced in the garden, making urgent calls to his attorney while trying to appear calm whenever the children looked his way. When Claire finally concluded her assessment, her expression had softened considerably. The home is certainly adequate, she admitted, reviewing her notes. Excellent, actually, and the children appear well cared for. They are, James assured her. I've made sure of it. Yes, but you have no legal standing, Mr. Morgan. And now that a relative has come forward. A relative who hasn't bothered to check on them in years, James interrupted. Who didn't even attend Elizabeth's funeral. Claire's professional mask slipped briefly. Unfortunately, blood relations typically receive preference in these situations, regardless of prior involvement. She tucked her tablet away. Ms. Bennett has requested a meeting with the children. She'll be flying in tomorrow. After she left, James found Hannah sitting on the porch swing, her mother's diary clutched to her chest. Aunt Sarah doesn't care about us, she said flatly. She and Mom fought all the time. She called Mom's art a waste of potential. James sat beside her. People can change. Not Aunt Sarah. She works for some big pharmaceutical company in California. The only reason she's interested now is because she found out about the painting. Hannah opened the diary. Look what Mom wrote about her last visit. James read the painful entry describing Sarah's criticism of Elizabeth's lifestyle and parenting choices. The final line was devastating. Sarah says I'm teaching my children to be dreamers instead of achievers. As if those things must be separate. We need to be prepared for tomorrow, James said gently. My legal team is working on guardianship, papers, but these things take time. Hannah looked up at him, vulnerability breaking through her usual composure. If she takes us away, will you still find us? Hannah, James said firmly, I will never lose track of you three. That's a promise. Inside, they found Olivia teaching Max how to fold paper cranes, the coffee table covered with colorful origami. Mom said if you fold 1,000, you get a wish, she explained when James asked about their project. What would you wish for? He asked. Olivia exchanged a glance with Max before answering. For everything to stay like it is now, with you here. That evening, after tucking the younger children into bed, James discovered Hannah in Elizabeth's old studio, meticulously arranging her mother's sketches. Mom organized everything chronologically, she explained. Each sketch relates to one of her major paintings. James helped her sort through the papers, marveling at Elizabeth's creative process. When they reached sketches related to the Redemption series, he noticed something curious: recurring symbols hidden in the backgrounds. These look like some kind of code, he observed, laying several sketches side by side. Hannah nodded eagerly. Mom loved puzzles and hidden messages, she said. Art should reveal itself in layers, like getting to know a person. Together they began analyzing the symbols, losing track of time until Max appeared in the doorway, clutching his teddy bear. I had a bad dream, he whispered, about the lady coming to take us away. James and Hannah exchanged concerned glances. Tomorrow would bring Sarah Bennett and whatever intentions she harbored, genuine or otherwise. Come here, James said, opening his arms. No one is taking you anywhere. As Max settled against him, James realized how completely these children had claimed his heart. Whatever happened tomorrow, he would protect them, just as Elizabeth had once protected him. Sarah Bennett arrived precisely at 2 o'clock, stepping out of a taxi with the brisk efficiency that had propelled her to an executive position at Medicorp Pharmaceuticals. She surveyed the Wilson home with visible surprise, noting the recent renovations and landscaping. Inside, James had prepared the children as best he could. Hannah sat rigidly on the sofa, her arm protectively around Max. Olivia fidgeted beside them, twisting a friendship bracelet around her wrist. James stood nearby, trying to project calm while his attorney, Marcus Delgado, arranged documents on the dining table. The doorbell rang and time seemed to freeze. Remember, James said softly, just be yourselves. Sarah Bennett was Elizabeth's, opposite in every way, sleek, polished, with sharp features and calculating eyes. Where Elizabeth had been warm colors and fluid movement, Sarah was monochrome precision. Even her smile seemed practiced as she entered the living room. My goodness, she exclaimed, studying the children. How you've all grown. Hannah, you look just like your mother. Her gaze swept over James. And you must be Mr. Morgan, the benefactor. Marcus stepped forward. Marcus Delgado, legal counsel for Mr. Morgan and the Wilson Children's Trust. Sarah's smile tightened. I wasn't aware children required legal representation to meet their aunt. Under these circumstances, clarity is important, Marcus replied smoothly. An uncomfortable silence followed until Hannah spoke. Why are you here, Aunt Sarah? You didn't come when Mom was sick. Sarah's composure faltered slightly. I wasn't informed of the severity of her condition. Work has kept me in California, and your mother and I weren't in regular contact. You argued with her, Olivia interjected. You made her cry. Sarah sighed. Family relationships are complicated, Olivia. Adults can disagree and still care about each other. She glanced at the children's wary faces. I'm here because you're my family. When I learned about your situation. You mean when you learned? About Mom's painting, Hannah interrupted. I see Elizabeth taught you her directness, Sarah replied with a thin smile. Yes, I heard about the painting, which led me to discover her passing and your guardianship status. As your closest blood relative, I felt responsible. James stepped forward. The children have been through significant upheaval. They're just beginning to find stability. In your care? Sarah raised an eyebrow. A single businessman with no experience raising children? A man whose connection to this family comes from a chance encounter decades ago and an obsession with my sister's art. Mr. Morgan has been here for us, Hannah countered. Where were you when Mom couldn't afford her medication? When we were eating ramen for days straight? Pain flickered across Sarah's face, quickly replaced by determination. I can't change the past, but I can ensure your future. I've already spoken with Child Protective Services. As your aunt, I have priority for guardianship. Marcus cleared his throat. Not necessarily. The court considers multiple factors, including the children's established bonds, emotional well-being, and, most importantly, Elizabeth's documented wishes. Sarah turned sharply. My sister left no will. Not a traditional one, James agreed. He nodded to Hannah, who brought forward the leather diary and spread out Elizabeth's sketches. But she left clear indications of her desires. Hannah carefully showed the coded symbols they'd discovered in her mother's artwork, particularly those in the Redemption series. Mom was creating a message throughout her final works. We've been deciphering it. Sarah looked skeptical. This is hardly legally binding. The court may disagree, Marcus replied, especially combined with Elizabeth's journal entries regarding your estrangement and her wishes for her children to remain together. I have no intention of separating them, Sarah protested. But you do intend to move them to California, James stated, watching her reaction. Away from their home, their school, their friends, away from their mother's final resting place. Sarah's composure cracked. I have responsibilities, a career. I can't simply relocate to Queens. And the painting? James asked quietly. What are your plans for Elizabeth's masterpiece? A telling pause. Naturally, it would be sold to provide for the children's future. It already has been, James replied, along with proper trust management to ensure the children benefit from their mother's legacy while preserving her artistic vision. Max, who had remained silent until now, suddenly spoke up. I don't want to go to California. I want to stay with James. Sarah stared at the little boy, clearly unprepared for his attachment to a man who'd been a stranger just weeks ago. Perhaps we should all take some time to consider what's truly best for the children, Marcus suggested diplomatically. After Sarah left, promising to return the following day, Hannah collapsed onto the sofa, exhaustion etched on her face. She's going to take us away, isn't she? James sat beside her. Not if I can help it, and I believe we found something important today. What's that? Your aunt's true motivation. She came expecting to control your mother's final masterpiece. Finding it already sold and you three protected by legal safeguards wasn't in her plan. Later that night, after the younger children were asleep, James found Hannah in the studio, again, intently studying her mother's sketches under a desk lamp. I found something, she whispered, eyes bright with discovery. Look at these symbols in the background of the guardian angel painting. They match this sketch dated 3 months before she died. James examined the papers, his heart quickening, as he recognized the pattern. It's a reference to the hospital room where I recovered after the accident, the room where she saved me. Hannah's fingers traced the delicate code. And here, these marks that look decorative, they're actual words when you connect them properly. She demonstrated, revealing a hidden message. The circle closes where it began. He will guard them as I guarded him. James stared at the revelation, emotions overwhelming him. Elizabeth had known all along, known who was collecting her work, understood the connection between them, and ultimately entrusted her children's future to the man whose life she had saved. Your mother planned this, he whispered. She knew somehow that I would find you. Hannah nodded, tears shining in her eyes. She was always 2 steps ahead of everyone. The scattered pieces were coming together, forming a picture of Elizabeth's final, most important work of art, creating a path for her children's protection after she was gone. Dawn found James and Hannah bleary-eyed but triumphant. They had spent much of the night piecing together Elizabeth's hidden messages scattered throughout her art. The dining room table was covered with sketches, journal entries, and photographs of paintings from James's collection. It's incredible, Marcus said, reviewing their findings over an early morning coffee. Elizabeth essentially created a visual will encoded in her art. Hannah nodded, pouring cereal for Max, who was watching cartoons. Mom always said art speaks when words fail. Will it be enough for court? James asked, rubbing his tired eyes. Combined with the children's clear preference and your established relationship, it strengthens our case considerably. Marcus organized the evidence into his briefcase. But Sarah has biological connection on her side, which courts typically favor. Olivia entered the kitchen, immediately sensing the tension. Is the mean lady coming back today? She's not mean, James corrected gently. She's your aunt, and she thinks she's doing what's best for you. But she doesn't know what's best, Olivia insisted. She doesn't know us at all. The doorbell rang, interrupting their conversation. James tensed, expecting Sarah, but instead found Claire Donovan from Child Protective Services. "Ms. Donovan, we weren't expecting you." "Surprise. Visits are part of our assessment process," she explained, stepping inside. Her eyes caught the evidence spread across the dining table. "I see you've been busy." James and Marcus explained their discovery while Claire examined Elizabeth's coded messages with professional interest. When Hannah demonstrated how the symbols connected across different paintings, Claire seemed genuinely impressed. "This is unusual," she admitted. "In most cases, we have either a clear legal document or nothing at all. My mom wouldn't leave us without a plan," Hannah said with quiet conviction. "She just made it part of her art like everything else important." Claire spent the next hour observing the household routine, how naturally James helped Max with his shoelaces, the easy way Olivia showed him her school project, how Hannah coordinated with him on the day's schedule. It was clear to everyone that they had become a functional family unit. "Mr. Morgan," Claire said as she prepared to leave, "I'll include these observations in my report. The children are clearly thriving in your care." "And Ms. Bennett's claim?" Marcus inquired. Claire's professional mask slipped slightly. "Between us, her interest seems to have developed rather suddenly for someone who hasn't been involved in the children's lives." She hesitated. "She did mention plans to list the house for sale if she obtains guardianship. Something about the real estate market being favorable." After she left, James paced the living room. "She wants to sell the house, Elizabeth's home, and take us to California," Hannah added, her face pale. "Not if I can help it," James promised, just as the doorbell rang again. This time it was Sarah, accompanied by a sharp-looking woman she introduced as her attorney, Patricia Wells. "I've been reviewing your situation," Sarah began without preamble, settling onto the sofa, "and I'm prepared to make a generous offer." "This isn't a business negotiation," James replied. "Everything's a negotiation, Mr. Morgan." Sarah nodded to her attorney, who opened a briefcase. "I'm willing to allow you visitation rights after the children relocate to California, even some input on their education." Hannah, sitting beside James, stiffened. "We don't want to go to California," Sarah continued as if she hadn't spoken. "Additionally, I understand your attachment to Elizabeth's artwork. I'm prepared to arrange for you to maintain possession of the final painting through a long-term loan agreement once it's been properly appraised and insured as part of the children's assets." Marcus leaned forward. "Ms. Bennett, the painting has already been authenticated and placed in trust for the children. Mr. Morgan has no personal claim to it." Sarah's practiced smile faltered. "I don't understand." "James bought the painting from us fair and square," Hannah explained. "Then he put the money in a trust for us. He doesn't own it, and neither do you." "That's impossible." Sarah turned to her attorney. "The painting is worth millions, which is precisely why it's being professionally managed for the children's benefit," Marcus interjected, "along with provisions for maintaining their home and education." Sarah's composure cracked. "This is ridiculous. They're children. They can't manage." "They aren't managing anything," James interrupted. "That's what trustees are for. Your sister ensured her legacy would support her children, not be liquidated for someone else's convenience." "Patricia." Wells touched Sarah's arm, whispering something that made her reluctantly fall silent. "Perhaps we should move this discussion to the preliminary hearing tomorrow," the attorney suggested smoothly. "The judge will want to hear directly from the children about their preferences." After they departed, James found Hannah in her mother's studio again, sitting cross-legged before the final painting. "Are you worried about tomorrow?" he asked, joining her on the floor. "A little," she admitted. "Aunt Sarah is pretty convincing." "She is," James agreed. "But remember what your mother wrote in her journal. Truth reveals itself in time, like layers of paint building a complete image." Hannah smiled slightly. "You memorized her words." "Some of them," James acknowledged. "They've become important to me." He hesitated. "Hannah, regardless of what happens tomorrow, I want you to know something. These past weeks with you, Olivia, and Max have been the most meaningful of my life. Even with all the problems, and the macaroni and cheese dinners." "James," Laughed, especially those. For years I've collected beautiful things, thinking they would fill the emptiness I felt. But it wasn't things I needed. It was people, Hannah finished. Mom used to say that too. James gently touched the corner of Elizabeth's painting. Your mother saved me twice, once from the car accident and now from a life without meaning. He looked at Hannah earnestly. Whatever the judge decides, we're connected now. Nothing changes that. Hannah nodded, determination replacing worry in her eyes. Mom's final message said the circle closes where it began. Tomorrow, we'll make sure it does. The family court occupied the third floor of a nondescript government building downtown. Despite its ordinary appearance, the tension in the air made it feel imposing as James led the Wilson children through security. Hannah gripped Olivia's hand tightly, while Max clung to James's leg, reluctant to venture further into the unfamiliar setting. Judge Eleanor Simmons's courtroom was smaller and less formal than James had expected, designed to be less intimidating for children. Still, Sarah and her attorney were already seated at one table, looking polished and confident. Marcus motioned James and the children to the opposite table, where folders of evidence were neatly arranged. Remember, James whispered, as they sat, just be honest about what you want. Judge Simmons, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, entered and quickly established the purpose of the preliminary hearing: to determine temporary guardianship of the Wilson children pending a final decision. I understand. We have competing petitions, she began, reviewing the files. Sarah Bennett, maternal aunt, and James Morgan, a family friend? She glanced up questioningly. Marcus rose. Your Honor, Mr. Morgan was a significant part of Elizabeth Wilson's life. She entrusted her children's well-being to him through encoded instructions in her artwork and journals. Patricia Wells immediately objected. Encoded messages in paintings hardly constitute legal guardianship designation, Your Honor. Judge Simmons held up her hand. I've reviewed the submissions, including the CPS reports and the rather unique evidence from Ms. Wilson's artwork. She turned her attention to the children. In cases like these, I find it helpful to hear directly from those most affected. Hannah straightened in her chair as the judge addressed her first. Hannah, I understand you're 12 years old and have been caring for your siblings since your mother's passing. Yes, Your Honor. Mom taught me what to do if something happened to her. And how do you feel about possibly living with your aunt in California? Hannah glanced briefly at Sarah before answering. I've only met Aunt Sarah 3 times in my life. She and Mom didn't get along. We have a home here, friends, and Mom's studio where I can still feel close to her. And Mr. Morgan, how does he fit into your life? James found us when I was trying to sell Mom's painting. He didn't just buy it, he made sure we were okay. He fixed our house, got Max medicine when he was sick, and helped me understand Mom's messages. Hannah's voice grew stronger. He's not just some stranger. Mom trusted him. The judge turned to Olivia, who twisted her friendship bracelet nervously. Olivia, who would you prefer to live with? James, she answered immediately. He listens when I talk about my day. Aunt Sarah keeps looking at her watch. A flush crept up Sarah's neck as Judge Simmons suppressed a smile. Max was too shy to speak much, but when asked, he climbed onto James's lap and stated simply, "He's my James." Judge Simmons then questioned both Sarah and James about their motivations and plans for the children's future. Sarah spoke of excellent schools in California, cultural opportunities, and financial security. James emphasized stability, community connections, and honoring Elizabeth's legacy by keeping the children in the home she had created for them. Your Honor, Sarah said finally, while Mr. Morgan's assistance has been commendable, blood relations should take precedence. I'm their only family. That's not true, Hannah interrupted, tears in her eyes. We're each other's family, and James is part of that now. Mom knew that would happen. That's why she made sure he'd find us. The judge considered this, studying the emotional connections evident before her. The way Max leaned against James, how Hannah and Olivia positioned themselves protectively alongside him, creating a unit that looked remarkably like a family despite its unconventional formation. I'll review the evidence and testimonies, Judge Simmons announced. We'll reconvene tomorrow morning for my decision on temporary guardianship. No one slept well that night. James paced the living room long after the children had gone to bed, rehearsing arguments and scenarios in his mind. Upstairs, Hannah stared at the ceiling, listening to Olivia's restless turning in the next bed while Max mumbled in his sleep. At breakfast, they moved in tense silence, the usual morning chatter replaced by the weight of the coming decision. James tried to project confidence as he flipped pancakes, the children's favorite, but his smile felt strained. "What if the judge picks Aunt Sarah?" Olivia finally asked, voicing everyone's fear. James set down his coffee. "Then we'll appeal." But Judge Simmons seemed fair and thoughtful. "She'll consider what's best for you." "And what's that?" Hannah asked, her eyes searching his. "That you stay together," James replied firmly. "That you remain in the home your mother created. That you're with someone who understands your mother's vision for your future. That we stay with you," Max added simply, maple syrup dripping from his chin. "Yes," James agreed, his throat tightening. "That too." The courthouse seemed more imposing the second day. News of the unusual case, a billionaire art collector seeking guardianship of 3 children connected to a valuable painting, had leaked to local media. A few reporters lingered outside, forcing Marcus to usher them through a side entrance. Sarah arrived moments before the hearing resumed, immaculately, dressed and flanked by her attorney. She nodded stiffly toward the children but avoided James's gaze. Judge Simmons entered, her expression giving nothing away as she arranged her papers. "I've carefully reviewed all evidence in this matter," she began, "including CPS reports, character, references, financial statements, and the rather unique artistic testament left by Elizabeth Wilson." The courtroom fell silent. Hannah reached for James's hand under the table. "In matters of guardianship, courts typically favor blood relations," Judge Simmons continued. Sarah straightened slightly. "However, each case must be evaluated on its specific merits with the children's best interest as the paramount consideration." She looked directly at the children. "Hannah, Olivia, and Max Wilson have formed a significant attachment to Mr. Morgan, who has provided stability during an exceptionally difficult transition. Ms. Bennett, while offering financial security, has had minimal involvement in the children's lives and proposes significant disruption to their existing support system." Sarah's attorney began scribbling notes rapidly. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "the evidence suggesting Elizabeth Wilson's intentions, while unconventional, is compelling. The consistent symbolism in her artwork, particularly the final painting, combined with her journal entries, suggests a deliberate plan to connect her children with Mr. Morgan." Judge Simmons folded her hands. "Therefore, I am granting temporary guardianship of all 3 Wilson children to James Morgan, pending final hearing in 6 months. The children will remain in their current home, with Ms. Bennett granted visitation rights to be arranged through the court." The relief that flooded through James was overwhelming. Hannah squeezed his hand so tightly it hurt, while Olivia bounced slightly in her chair. Even Marcus allowed himself a small smile. Sarah sat motionless, her expression unreadable. As the judge continued outlining specific conditions of the guardianship, Patricia Wells whispered urgently in Sarah's ear. When court adjourned, Sarah approached them in the hallway. James instinctively moved closer to the children. "Congratulations," she said stiffly. "The judge was clearly moved by your connection." "Sarah," James began, "the children would benefit from knowing their maternal family. I hope you'll still be part of their lives." Something flickered in her eyes, hurt perhaps or regret. "They barely know me." "That could change," Hannah offered unexpectedly. "Mom would have wanted us to know you, even if you didn't always get along." Sarah glanced at her niece, surprise softening her features. "Perhaps you're right." She straightened her jacket. "I need to return to California, but I'll be in touch." As they watched her walk away, Marcus cleared his throat. A better outcome than expected. She didn't contest the temporary ruling. "Will," She fight the permanent one? James asked quietly. Time will tell, Marcus replied. But judges rarely reverse temporary placements that are working well. Outside, the October sunshine felt especially bright. Max ran ahead to the car, his earlier fears forgotten, while Olivia chattered about decorating her room, permanently now. Hannah lingered beside James. Mom was right, she said, looking up at him. The circle did close where it began. James nodded, understanding perfectly. Your mother saved me 20 years ago. Now I get to return the favor by taking care of what she loved most. Together they walked toward the waiting car and the home that had become theirs. The next 6 months transformed the Wilson house in ways, both subtle and profound. What had once been Elizabeth's studio gradually became a shared creative space. Hannah discovered her mother's talent had indeed passed to her, as she filled sketchbooks with increasingly confident drawings. Olivia commandeered one corner for her science experiments while Max's side overflowed with Lego constructions and model dinosaurs. James, who had once occupied a sterile penthouse without a single family photo, now found himself surrounded by evidence of vibrant life. Homework on the refrigerator, mismatched socks in the laundry, and the constant symphony of children's voices. On this particular evening, Hannah found him in the dining room, surrounded by documents. More guardianship. Paperwork? She asked, sliding into the chair beside him. Actually, something different. James pushed a folder toward her. The Carmichael Museum wants to exhibit your mother's complete redemption series, including the final painting. Hannah's eyes widened. A whole exhibit just for Mom's work? The curator calls it a significant rediscovery. They're particularly interested in the coded elements we found. James hesitated, but it would mean lending them the Guardian Angel painting. I wanted to discuss it with you first. Hannah considered this carefully. Would people learn Mom's whole story? About how she saved you and then you saved us? If you want them to know, yes. Then we should do it. Mom always said art needs to be seen to fulfill its purpose. The conversation was interrupted by the doorbell. Marcus stood on the porch, his expression serious. I received a call from Patricia Wells today, he said once they were seated in the living room. Sarah wants to discuss the permanent guardianship hearing. James tensed. Is she contesting? That's just it. She wants to meet with all of you before making her decision. 2 days later, Sarah arrived for dinner. The children watched cautiously as she handed James a bottle of wine and presented each of them with carefully chosen gifts. Art supplies for Hannah, a chemistry kit for Olivia, and dinosaur models for Max. Your mother mentioned your interests in her emails, she explained, noticing their surprise. We didn't speak often, but she kept me updated. Over James's roast chicken, his cooking skills had improved dramatically. Sarah seemed different. Less rigid, more attentive. She asked about school, listened to Olivia's detailed explanation of photosynthesis, and admired Max's dinosaur facts without checking her watch once. After the children were excused, Sarah turned to James. I've been doing a lot of thinking since the hearing. And I was wrong. She traced the rim of her glass. I thought biological connection automatically granted me rights, but it doesn't. Grant understanding. You understand these children in ways I don't. James waited, sensing there was more. The truth is, Sarah continued, I was jealous. Elizabeth always had this magic. People were drawn to her, inspired by her. Our parents favored her artistic soul over my practical nature. She sighed. When I heard about the valuable painting, I convinced myself I was protecting my niece and nephews from an opportunistic stranger. And now? Now I see what Elizabeth saw, someone who would care for her children because of who they are, not what they're entitled to. Sarah straightened. I won't contest the permanent guardianship. The children belong with you. Relief washed over James. Thank you. But, Sarah added, I would like to remain in their lives, to know them better. Elizabeth would have wanted that despite our differences. Later, after Sarah had gone, Hannah found James on the porch swing. Is Aunt Sarah going to try taking us again? She asked, settling beside him. No. She's withdrawing her petition. James put his arm around her shoulders. She wants to be your aunt, not your guardian. Hannah nodded thoughtfully. That feels right somehow. Inside, Olivia and Max were preparing the table for their traditional Friday movie night. The routine had become sacred. Popcorn in colorful bowls, pillows on the floor, and a film chosen by rotating vote. You know, James said, watching them through the window, the permanent guardianship hearing is just 2 weeks away. Are you nervous? Hannah asked. Terrified, he admitted with a small laugh. But also more certain than I've ever been about anything. Hannah leaned against his shoulder, a gesture that had become familiar and precious. Mom would be happy. You know that, right? I hope so. She is, Hannah said with absolute certainty. I can feel it. Together they went inside to join the others, the future clearer than it had been in months. The day of the permanent guardianship hearing arrived with crisp autumn air that mirrored the atmosphere from exactly 6 months earlier. The trees that had been budding with spring promise now blazed with fall colors, a cycle completed. James adjusted Max's bow tie in the hallway outside the courtroom. The boy had insisted on dressing like James for the important occasion and now fidgeted in his miniature suit and polished shoes. Do I look proper? Max asked seriously. Extremely proper, James assured him, suppressing a smile. Hannah and Olivia waited nearby in carefully chosen dresses, Hannah's hair braided elaborately by Sarah the previous evening. Their aunt had become a regular presence in their lives, weekend, visits, video calls, even attending Olivia's school science fair. The transformation in their relationship had been gradual, but genuine. Everyone ready? Marcus approached, carrying his briefcase. Judge Simmons is known for punctuality. Inside the courtroom, James was surprised to see several unfamiliar faces. In addition to Sarah and her attorney, the back row held Mrs. Abernathy, Claire Donovan from CPS, and even Catherine, James's longtime assistant. Quite the support team, Marcus remarked. That's favorable. Judge Simmons entered, acknowledging the familiar faces with a slight nod before beginning proceedings. We're here to determine permanent guardianship for Hannah, Olivia, and Max Wilson, she stated. I've reviewed the reports from the temporary placement period, which appear overwhelmingly positive. She glanced at her notes. Miss Bennett, I understand you've withdrawn your petition for guardianship. Sarah stood. Yes, Your Honor. After careful consideration, I believe Mr. Morgan is best suited to raise my sister's children. I fully support his petition for permanent guardianship. The judge raised her eyebrows, clearly surprised by this unambiguous endorsement. That's a significant change from your previous position. I've had the opportunity to observe Mr. Morgan with my nieces and nephew, Sarah explained. His commitment to their well-being is extraordinary. More importantly, the children are thriving in his care while maintaining their connection to their mother's memory and home. Judge Simmons turned to Claire Donovan, who confirmed that all follow-up assessments had been exemplary. The children have shown remarkable emotional stability considering their loss. Their academic performance has improved, and they've maintained healthy friendships and community involvement. One by one, other witnesses offered their perspectives. Mrs. Abernathy describing the transformation of the household, Catherine detailing how James had restructured his entire business model to prioritize family time, even Hannah's art teacher, speaking to her blossoming talent nurtured by James's encouragement. Finally, Judge Simmons addressed the children directly. Hannah, Olivia, and Max, your opinions matter greatly in this decision. How do you feel about Mr. Morgan becoming your permanent guardian? Hannah spoke first, her voice steady. James found us when we needed someone most. He didn't just give us a home. He helped us keep Mom's memory alive. He learns every day how to be what we need. Olivia nodded enthusiastically. He comes to all my science competitions, even though he says some of the experiments make him nervous. Max, not to be outdone, declared. He reads 3 stories at bedtime, not just one. And he does all the voices right. Laughter softened the formality of the courtroom, and even Judge Simmons smiled. Mr. Morgan, she said finally, when you first appeared in my courtroom, I had serious reservations about your petition. It's unusual for for someone with no prior connection to seek guardianship of 3 children. James nodded, his heart racing. However, she continued, the evidence of the genuine bonds you've formed is undeniable. More importantly, you've maintained stability in these children's lives during an extraordinarily difficult transition. She signed the document before her. I hereby grant permanent legal guardianship of Hannah, Olivia, and Max Wilson to James Morgan. The formality of the courtroom couldn't contain Max's whoop of joy or Olivia's spontaneous applause. Hannah simply reached for James's hand, squeezing it tightly as tears slipped down her cheeks. Family isn't always created by blood, Judge Simmons concluded. Sometimes it's formed through circumstance, choice, and love. Clearly, that's what's happened here. Outside the courtroom, surrounded by well-wishers, James caught Sarah's eye over the children's heads. She nodded once, a gesture of respect and perhaps even gratitude. They had both found their proper places in these children's lives, different roles but each important in its own way. That evening, the house on Maple Street glowed with celebration. Friends filled the renovated rooms and the dining table overflowed with food. In the center stood a cake decorated with sunflowers, Elizabeth's favorite and the symbol that had connected them all. As James watched Hannah showing her latest sketches to her art teacher, Olivia explaining a science project to fascinated adults, and Max charming everyone with dinosaur facts, he felt a peculiar sense of completion. What had begun with a small girl selling lemonade had become the most important journey of his life. The final piece of the puzzle had fallen into place, creating a picture more beautiful than any he could have imagined. 1 year later, the Carmichael Museum of Modern Art buzzed with anticipation. The grand opening of Redemption, the Elizabeth Bennet Wilson collection, had drawn art critics, collectors, and media from across the country. In a private room adjacent to the main gallery, James adjusted his tie while Hannah fussed with Max's collar. Remember, James reminded the children, tonight is about celebrating your mother's work. If the attention gets overwhelming, just signal me, and we'll take a break. Hannah nodded, elegant beyond her 13 years in a deep blue dress that matched her mother's favorite painting color. Olivia twirled in her own dress, while Max practiced his museum manners with exaggerated care. Sarah joined them, having flown in specifically for the opening. Elizabeth would be so proud, she said, surveying her nieces and nephew. Not just of her exhibition, but of who you're becoming. The transformation in Sarah over the past year had been remarkable. Monthly visits had evolved into genuine affection. She'd become the fun aunt who brought exotic souvenirs from business trips and maintained a separate room in her California home for their summer visits. It's time, announced the museum director, Catherine Wilson, no relation, ushering them toward the entrance. Mr. Morgan, would you and the children do the honors? Together, they cut the ceremonial ribbon. Applause echoed through the grand hall as they entered the exhibition space where all 18 paintings of the Redemption series hung in sequence for the first time ever, culminating with Guardian Angel. Art critics moved slowly through the exhibition, murmuring appreciatively about Elizabeth's technique and vision. Information panels beside each painting explained not only the artistic elements, but also the hidden code that Elizabeth had embedded throughout the series, the story of salvation, protection, and legacy that had ultimately saved her children. Mr. Morgan, called a journalist, is it true you discovered the final painting through pure chance? James smiled, his arm protectively around Max's shoulders. There was nothing chance about it. Elizabeth made sure her work would find its way to complete the circle. And now you're raising her children, another reporter observed. That's quite a responsibility for someone who was previously known for corporate acquisitions rather than family life. Hannah stepped forward before James could respond. Our mom knew exactly what she was doing, she said confidently. She chose James long before we met him. The confidence in her voice silenced further questions. The family continued their circuit of the gallery, pausing longest before the final painting. Guardian Angel had been positioned as the culmination of the exhibit, with Elizabeth's decoded message presented alongside it, explaining how she had saved a young man's life after a car accident, and how years later, He would become the guardian of her greatest treasures. In front of this painting, a small crowd had gathered, drawn by both its artistic merit and the poignant story behind it. "Is it strange?" Sarah asked James quietly, watching the visitors admire her sister's work. "Sharing something so personal with the public?" "Elizabeth deserves recognition," James replied. "Her art was meant to be seen, and this way her story lives on." As the evening progressed, Hannah found a moment alone with James in a quiet corner of the gallery. "I've been thinking about something," she said, suddenly serious. "What's that?" "About names. We're still the Wilsons and you're still Morgan." James nodded cautiously. "That's right. But we're a family now, legally and everything." Hannah twisted her program nervously. "What would you think about, maybe, us having the same name? Either way could work. We could be Morgans, or you could be a Wilson." James felt his heart swell, with emotion he couldn't quite contain. "Hannah, are you asking if I'd consider adopting you and your siblings?" She nodded, watching his face anxiously. "Is that weird? After everything's already settled with the guardianship?" "Not weird at all," James assured her, voice thick with emotion. "It would be the greatest honor of my life." Across the gallery, Olivia had charmed a group of art patrons with her intelligent observations, while Max proudly pointed out hidden symbols he'd helped discover in his mother's work. Sarah chatted amicably with Marcus about the children's trust fund and future educational plans family. Not formed in the conventional way, but no less real. No less profound. As Hannah rejoined her siblings, James gazed at Elizabeth's final painting, the guardian angel watching over 3 small figures, and whispered a silent thank you to the woman who had saved him twice. Once from a burning car, and then from an empty life devoid of love. The adoption proceedings were remarkably straightforward compared to the guardianship battle of the previous year. On a bright spring morning, James and the children entered the family court, the same one where Judge Simmons had granted permanent guardianship, with an atmosphere of celebration rather than anxiety. "Wilson Morgan or Morgan Wilson?" Olivia debated as they waited in the hallway. "I've been practicing my signature both ways." "What about just Morgan?" Max suggested, swinging his legs from the bench. "It's shorter to write on school papers." Hannah remained thoughtful. "Mom would want us to choose what feels right to us." Judge Simmons welcomed them with genuine warmth when they entered her courtroom. "Well, if it isn't my favorite unconventional family," she remarked, setting aside formality. "I've reviewed your petition for adoption, Mr. Morgan, and I must say it's a pleasure to see a happy ending in this courtroom." The proceedings were brief but meaningful. Each child was asked individually if they consented to the adoption and their choice regarding their surname. "I wish to be Hannah Elizabeth Morgan," Hannah stated clearly, "to honor both my mother and the father who chose us." Olivia and Max followed with similar declarations, though Max insisted on keeping Wilson as his middle name so I don't forget where I started. When Judge Simmons asked James to confirm his commitment, he spoke from the heart. "These children have given my life meaning beyond anything I could have imagined. Formally becoming their father only makes official what has been true in my heart. Since the day Hannah sold me lemonade on a cold October morning, then by the power vested in me," Judge Simmons declared, "I hereby decree that Hannah, Olivia, and Max are legally the children of James Morgan, with all rights and responsibilities therein." She signed the final document with a flourish. "Congratulations to the Morgan family." Afterward, they celebrated at Riverside Park, where Elizabeth had often taken the children to paint landscapes. Sarah joined them, bringing a cake decorated with the Morgan family crest alongside sunflowers, a perfect symbol of their blended history. "I have news," Sarah announced as they enjoyed their picnic. "I've accepted a transfer to the New York's office. I'll be moving here next month." "You're moving to New York?" Hannah asked, surprised. Sarah nodded. "I've realized what I've been missing by prioritizing work over family. You 3 are my connection to Elizabeth. I don't want to be just a holiday visitor in your lives." James offered his hand. "Welcome to New York." That evening, after the younger children were asleep, James found Hannah in her studio space, working on a large canvas. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to her work in progress. Hannah nodded, stepping aside to reveal a painting that showed unmistakable influence from her mother's style, but with her own distinct perspective. It depicted 5 figures in an abstract setting: James, herself, Olivia, Max, and a luminous presence that could only be Elizabeth. "It's beautiful," James said softly. "Your mother's talent lives in you. I'm calling it Full Circle," Hannah explained, "for the exhibit at school." James nodded, understanding the significance. "Perfect title." Hannah set down her brush, suddenly serious. "Dad?" The word still felt new on her tongue. "Can I ask you something important?" "Anything. If Mom hadn't died. If you'd just bought her painting but she was still here. Would our lives still have connected somehow?" James considered this thoughtfully. "I believe they would have. Your mother created a path between us long before we knew it existed. The painting was just the vehicle." Hannah seemed satisfied with this answer. "That's what I think too." From the hallway came the sound of Max calling out in his sleep, a habit that had diminished but occasionally returned. James squeezed Hannah's shoulder before going to check on him. In Max's room, dinosaur nightlights cast gentle shadows across walls now covered with both prehistoric creatures and art prints. James sat on the edge of the bed, soothing Max back to sleep with the familiar reassurance of his presence. This was his life now. Midnight comfort, art studio conversations, science fair projects, and a home filled with laughter and occasional chaos. Nothing like the ordered solitude he had known before. Nothing he would trade for all the rare art in the world. Outside the window, stars glittered above the neighborhood where a talented artist had once raised her children alone, somehow knowing that one day the circle would close, that the man whose life she saved would return to save what she loved most. 5 years to the day since Hannah had set up her lemonade stand outside Morgan Tower, the family gathered in the backyard of their Maple Street home. The old Victorian had been lovingly restored, its character preserved while its systems were modernized. Elizabeth's studio remained largely untouched, though now it served as a shared creative space for all 3 children. James surveyed the scene with quiet contentment. Hannah, now 17 and already receiving college art scholarship offers, was setting up an easel near the flowering cherry tree. Olivia, 14 and scientifically brilliant, was explaining some complex theory to Sarah, who nodded with genuine interest. 10-year-old Max, still dinosaur-obsessed, but now also a budding photographer, was capturing candid shots of the gathering. "Hard to believe it's been 5 years," Marcus remarked, joining James by the grill. Now more friend than attorney, he had remained close to the family through their journey. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday," James replied. "Other times I can barely remember my life before them." The occasion was special, the unveiling of Hannah's latest work, commissioned by the Carmichael Museum as a companion piece to her mother's Redemption series. She had worked on it secretly for months, allowing no one to see it before completion. As twilight approached, guests gathered around the covered canvas. Hannah stood before them, confident yet humble. "Mom believed art tells. The stories we can't put into words," she began. 5 years ago, her final painting connected our lives in ways none of us could have imagined." She glanced at James, who gave her an encouraging nod. "This painting is called The Guardian's Circle," Hannah continued, unveiling the canvas. Gasps of appreciation rose from the gathering. The painting depicted a scene instantly recognizable yet transformed through Hannah's unique vision. A young girl at a lemonade stand, a tall figure approaching through swirling autumn leaves, and above them, a luminous presence, Elizabeth, guiding their meeting. Most striking was the background, the Morgan Tower skyscraper reflected in its windows, not its own steely facade, but the warm interior of the Wilson family home. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes. "Elizabeth would be so proud," she whispered. "She is," Max said with absolute certainty. "Mom's always watching." James studied the painting, overwhelmed by its emotional power and technical skill. Hannah had inherited her mother's gift for embedding meaning in each brushstroke. Like the guardian angel painting that had brought them together, this one told their story, past, present, and future, interconnected. As night fell, the family gathered on the porch swing, James with Max beside him, Hannah and Olivia leaning against the railing. Above them, stars emerged in the deepening blue. "Dad?" Max asked. "Do you think some things are meant to happen no matter what?" James considered the extraordinary chain of events that had brought them together. A car accident 25 years ago, a painting with a hidden message, a determined girl with a lemonade stand. "Yes," he said finally. "Some circles are meant to be completed." Hannah smiled, her expression so like her mother's that James's heart tightened with love and gratitude. The last painting had found its way home, and so had they all.